Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to FEMA Region 2's Individual and Community Preparedness Monthly Webinar Series. Today's topic will be libraries and non-traditional facilities and emergencies. Before we get started, please make sure that the volume is turned up on your computers as the proceedings will be playing through your computer speakers. This webinar is being recorded, and the link will be made available after the proceedings end. We'll also have a question and answer session after the presentation concludes. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Debbie Costa, Preparedness Specialist in FEMA Region 2, to provide an introduction to today's webinar and our speakers. Debbie?
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Costa, the Preparedness Liaison on the New Jersey FEMA Integration Team. On behalf of our team working to strengthen preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the August installment of our monthly webinar series. As part of FEMA's 2018 to 2022 strategic plan, our goal one is to build a culture of preparedness. The Individual and Community Preparedness Division is focused on helping people prepare for disasters, which includes increasing the percentage of people with savings set aside for an emergency, delivering training to help nonprofits and community-based organizations continue service delivery following a disaster, and increasing the percentage of people who have taken preparedness actions. As part of our goal to create a culture of preparedness, we're pleased to be hosting this month's webinar on the unique and important role public facilities like libraries and senior centers can play in the community's response and recovery during disasters and emergencies. We are excited to have three featured presenters to share their experience on this topic. Our first speaker is Michelle Stricker. Michelle is the Deputy State Librarian of Lifelong Learning at the New Jersey State Library, where she is responsible for library trustee and director education and training, library law, strategic planning, preservation, and disaster preparedness and community resilience. In addition to an MLIS from Rutgers University, she has an MFA in Museum Studies from Syracuse and an MA in Art History from the University of Pennsylvania. This year, Michelle was named one of Library Journal's national movers and shakers in the library field for her work in developing new tools and resources designed to help librarians be better equipped to assist emergency responders after a disaster and to fulfill their role as information first responders. These resources have blossomed into a multi-curriculum training program that she has presented via webinars and at state and national library conferences, as well as to the Domestic Security Task Force Office of Homeland Security. Michelle's efforts have led to the New Jersey State Library signing a Memorandum of Understanding with the New Jersey Governor's Office of VOAD and being a formal part of New Jersey's Office of Emergency Management statewide disaster plan. Michelle?
Okay, let's see if I can get the first slide up here. There we go. So first of all, I want to thank Debbie and FEMA Region 2 for having me on today. I think everybody can hear me fine, but you'll let me know if you cannot. So today I want to talk to you about the library, and the library specifically as a community recovery center and an information center after a disaster. Because, you know, when disaster strikes, where do you go? Well, after Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey back in October 2012, people went to their local library. Many community libraries were pressed into service as ad hoc disaster recovery centers. And even though they may have sustained great damage to their own buildings and were without power themselves, librarians rallied and were in the forefront of providing services and information to those in need and a respite from the storm for shattered communities. Unless damaged by flooding, New Jersey libraries were open and were the places residents flocked to the morning after Sandy passed, using computers and free wireless to begin putting their lives back together, to conduct business, to contact relatives to let them know they were okay, or their insurance companies, to fill out FEMA forms, or just to power up their devices and warm up. Libraries truly serve their communities as ports in a storm, even though many were not prepared to serve in this capacity as an unofficial community disaster recovery center. So to help librarians become better prepared for the next disaster, the New Jersey State Library organized a statewide summit we called Ports in the Storm. And the purpose of the summit was to help libraries be even better partners in the community disaster response and recovery when the next emergency strikes. So we partnered with the National Network Libraries of Medicine on the conference, and it was attended by 125 librarians, including representatives from New York, Delaware, and Virginia. The summit brought medical and public librarians together with the emergency planning community, first responders, public health workers, and faith-based groups, and provided a forum for discussing the roles libraries and information professionals played in supporting future disaster preparedness, response, and recovery efforts. So what do I hope to accomplish today? My goal is to promote the role of libraries as your partners in disaster response. I'm going to tell you about what some of our libraries did for their communities after Superstorm Sandy to demonstrate how libraries are assets in a disaster and to give you some ideas on how you can partner with them in your own community. So, libraries should prepare and embrace their roles as community disaster recovery centers and telecommunication information hubs in the event of an emergency. And this is what the New Jersey State Library has been challenging libraries to assume this role for about 6 years now. And we've created a specialized toolkit to help libraries be better prepared to help the community. Now, I want to be clear that I know what a FEMA pre-qualified disaster recovery center is, and that libraries are not official DRCs. Well, maybe a few are, like the Lakeville Public Library shown here, but I know that not every library can serve as an official DRC. I know they're expensive to set up and staff, and I know that FEMA, doesn't have the resources to set up and staff every library, of which we have 430 individual buildings in the state of New Jersey after an emergency. But libraries have served as unofficial DRCs through many a storm, and librarians have worked alongside of FEMA and emergency responders, supporting their services and providing assistance after Sandy and other natural and man-made disasters. Libraries are a community hub, a safe place, and a place to recovery after a disaster, and these are all natural roles they assume in the community. Hurricane Sandy was a reminder to city, county, and state officials that libraries are valuable, proven assets in disaster response and serve as a rallying point for the community because of the multiple roles they play after a disaster. As I said, we have over 400 library buildings in New Jersey, and they are located in every community, and their locations are well known even by those who are non-users. And by the way, all the photographs and the drawings that you see me put up were all done by people or photographs taken right after Hurricane Sandy of people in our own libraries. So after a disaster, libraries are a welcoming refuge for a traumatized, displaced community and offer a multitude of services, such as relaxing and comfortable seating and flexible spaces, heating or air conditioning, and restroom facilities. They are the de facto community and information hub because they have well-equipped tech labs with internet, free Wi-Fi, email, fax, photocopiers, and landlines. And they serve as a general gathering place for the community to receive information updates. They were used after Sandy as temporary headquarters for FEMA, government agencies, relief workers, the military, and as distribution centers for relief agencies for food and clothing drives. Libraries restore a sense of normalcy to the community by reestablishing a routine for adults and children amidst chaos. Libraries have always provided these services to the community, but in an emergency they are truly ports in a storm. And embracing this role is another way libraries continue to evolve to meet the needs of the community and are valued as an essential community service. At our Ports in the Storm conference, the Red Cross representative told us that the number one need after a disaster is information, and that is exactly what librarians are trained to provide. Their skill set is such that they're great with technology, they deliver accurate, vetted information in a variety of formats and settings, and they're good at strategizing and problem solving quickly. Furthermore, the public sees librarians as more approachable than government agency staff. They are viewed as knowledgeable, trustful, helpful, and customer service oriented. The staffs are dedicated and they know their customers. Many live in the communities where they work, and so they know the local people from all around town. They can really be a huge help to you after a disaster when you need to get important information out to the people. So we stress to librarians that they serve in the capacity of second responders who support first responders. We don't want librarians to rush in alongside emergency personnel and get in your way. The objective of a second responder is to quickly enable people to get back to work, back to their lives, and ensure recovery of the community's economic life. Identifying and empowering second responders helps make a difference between lasting disruption and a quick return to daily life, and libraries play a critical role in making this happen. And yes, we call ourselves information first responders, and I actually have those pins made in the upper right-hand corner, and all the librarians love them, and they call me and ask me for them all the time. So furthermore, libraries continue to play a role in the community long after the disaster is over, and this role extends much longer than any other organizations, because emergency responders are going to withdraw once the emergency is over, or FEMA and other agencies are going to, pull out once all the forms are filled out. But libraries have staying power in their community, and even today, they're still assisting people who were affected by Hurricane Sandy. So here's a couple examples of how libraries that were in the direct path of Sandy actively served as disaster recovery centers. And hopefully this will also give you some ideas of how you can partner with the libraries, in whatever town you're in. This is the town of Neptune on the left, where you see the yellow tents. Before the storm hit, the mayor told library staff to be ready to report to work. Library staff also prepared their facility in advance for the aftermath of the storm and the influx of people that was sure to come. So in the library, they added extra extension cords and power strips to meet demands. They suspended all library fines and fees, and they moved their furniture around to accommodate crowds and power users. Now, off-site, the mayor told the outreach and reference librarians to pack up their portable laptops and walk over to the part of town where the emergency management truck had been brought in as a mobile command center that provided power and a Wi-Fi node for internet access, and that's what you see here in the yellow tents. Public Works brought in tables, propane heaters, and porta-johns, and the librarians brought their laptop computers, power cables, and power strips. And they manned the emergency management tent and helped residents with FEMA applications for 5 days after the storm. And they input FEMA applications right there at the scene. And residents walked from all over town to get there as the roads were impassable. Librarians helped somewhere around 150 residents just off-site, off the library site, a few days post-Sandy, not to mention what they did, who they helped inside the library. Now, Ocean County, which you'll see on the right-hand side, top and bottom, Ocean County was the hardest hit, and so was the Ocean County Library System, which has 22 branches. They lost 2 branches totally, which has since reopened with major renovations. But after the storm passed, Ocean County Library tried to get as many of their branches open as possible. They already had a standby generator that powered their network, but nothing else, so their main building had no power. And even so, their Municipal Office of Emergency Managers used their main branch as their headquarters. The library ran food and coat drives, out of their spaces. They set up their website as Hurricane resource information site, and they held a 2-day information fair. They just put it together like that in 2 of their branch locations, bringing together community offices and volunteer groups all in one place to make it easy for the community to get the help that they needed. So social media has proven to be very adept at covering disasters. And when Sandy hit New York and New Jersey, people went to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to post and share images of the storm. People use social media to connect, to share stories and information, to locate friends and relatives, and to collaborate disaster recovery efforts. Local folks also use social media to keep up with news reports and even made use of mapping sites to track open gas stations and food and water supply distribution. Thousands of photos of the storm damages were posted to Facebook and Flickr. So social media, as you know, is now integrated into all emergency preparedness and communications efforts because the public is expecting it and the public is using it. They are not waiting to be told what to do. They are actively posting what they know and seeking what they don't know. And this is where technology is particularly well suited to librarians who are information professionals and usually early adapters of new technologies. Here is where we can really become information first responders. Websites and email will continue to be important resources for the public, but in a time of crisis and the resulting communication noise, librarians can push out urgent messages directly into the social media world and then direct the public back to their more extensive online resources. Libraries bring resources and capabilities to emergency management after a disaster, although they may not always be aware of the important role they play in community resiliency, another topic we're working on now. So it would be helpful if emergency management community and FEMA approached them to discuss preparing resources ahead of time. So if your local library is not familiar with disaster recovery or the importance of their role in the community after a disaster, you can help educate libraries about risk assessment, mitigation, and preparation planning. And I believe this is, where your fit teams come in your strategic plan, where you're trying to fit in locally. Incorporate libraries into your state and local preparedness exercise scenarios and action plans. Start by establishing a primary point of contact at the library, and that's usually the director, and give them a seat at the table at your planning meetings and include them in briefings and updates. Realize that this partnership must be sustained, that training, outreach, and communication is an ongoing process every year. Recognize the importance of getting local libraries open quickly after disaster, and remember FEMA considers the library an essential service under the Stafford Act. Help them to help the community by restoring power, cleaning debris, and doing minor repairs around the library facility, and work on a plan together. Funding is not needed for this or is minimal, and it should not be an obstacle in your partnership efforts. You may need to convince libraries of that. What is required is staff time for meetings and space. So we appreciate that NJOEM has recognized the important role libraries play after disaster and consequently have included us in the State Emergency Operations Plan under NJ ESF 15, the recovery category, as Debbie mentioned in the beginning. The New Jersey State Library has also signed a memorandum of understanding with the NJ Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, which runs out of the governor's office. The concept of the MOU includes actions to be taken by the agencies responsible for volunteer management during the pre-event timeframe, as well as in the response and recovery periods. So specifically, the state library will coordinate the establishment of volunteer registration sites at county or municipal libraries in order to be accessible to members of the public who are interested in volunteering. Volunteer registration sites may be established in the event of a significant disaster when large numbers of unaffiliated volunteers are offering or expected to offer assistance after the incident. The volunteer registration site offers a safe and convenient location for volunteers to obtain registration assistance for volunteer opportunities if they have not done so by phone or online. So the local library really is a port in the storm when you need it most, and it can truly be a lifesaver when we all work together to offer a wealth of coordinated services to a community in need. So this is my short version of the presentation, and I hope it helped you see libraries in a new light. We're going to start working on them to become reunification centers, so that's our next goal. And that's the end of my presentation, so thank you, and feel free to contact me with any questions or comments. My email is in the beginning on the very first slide, which I understand they're going to be putting up on your website somewhere. And thanks again for having me.
Michelle, thank you so much. Don't go away.
I'm not.
Questions for you in the end, but I'd like to introduce everyone to our next speakers, Chris Pagnotta and Linda Whitaker. Christopher Pagnotta is a program manager in the Human Services Unit at New York City Emergency Management. Chris coordinates New York City's Cooling Center program, which provides the public with free air-conditioned facilities to use during heat emergencies. Chris also manages the city's advanced warning system, which reaches the city's most vulnerable residents through public information and community outreach. Prior to working for the city, Chris produced and managed websites for United Cerebral Palsy of New York City and the AMC TV network. Linda Whitaker has worked in the field of aging for over 40 years. Various promotions have led to her current assignment as Assistant Commissioner, Bureau of Emergency Management at New York City Department for the Aging. Her current responsibilities include liaison to the New York City Office of Emergency Management, emergency planning for both the department and subcontracted community partners, and continuity of operations planning. She currently serves on numerous committees, boards, task forces concerning emergency preparedness and health issues. She has received numerous awards and often speaks and gives technical assistance to various groups. Ms. Whitaker received her master's degree from Baruch College's Executive Public Affairs program. Chris and Linda?
Thank you so much for that great introduction. We really appreciate being included here and getting to present about our Cooling Center program, and we're excited to get started. I'm going to set things up by giving a presentation on what New York City's heat plan looks like and how it works, and what we look for in our Cooling Center partners, to set it up for Linda to talk about what a great job they do about really fulfilling and knocking those requirements out of the park and adding on extra services and extra things that make them an ideal partner. But to get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about why heat is considered an emergency in New York City and elsewhere. I expect this to be familiar to a lot of people on the presentation, but maybe not quite to everybody. So I just want to set it up to talk about what are the hazards for heat, who's really at risk, what do we do operationally to mitigate those risks, and why are cooling centers so important and what makes a good one. So to get into that a little bit, hot weather and heat waves are the #1 weather-related mortality-producing event nationally and in New York City specifically. We see every summer 13 heat stroke deaths, 115 excess natural cause deaths, and these are from a variety of reasons, people having heart attacks and other health events that are contributed to by heat. And we've got a great health department here in New York City, DOHMH, who does a lot of research to quantify exactly how many people are dying at different times. It's doing syndromic surveillance to tell when heat is really causing these dramatic spikes in those deaths and in those heat-related emergency room visits and hospital admissions. And then we have a couple stats up there of some of the kind of nightmare scenarios that have happened over the last 20, 30 years. The 1995 Chicago event with 750 plus deaths is been well documented. There's a great book out there by Eric Kleinenberg called Heat Wave that is really fantastic and has informed a lot of the way that I think about this issue, both in terms of cooling centers and the city's response to heat in general, and I'd recommend it to everybody. And then there have been, the 2003 heat wave in France and the 2015 in India, where the number of deaths reached in the thousands. So this is these are events that really require a coordinated, systematic response, of which cooling centers are an important part, but just a part. And that's why we go to these extents and we pull together all our partner agencies to get on our heat emergency calls and to coordinate so closely. When we talk about all of those mortality events and hospital admissions, the people that are most vulnerable are listed here. The biggest risk factors: chronic health conditions, cognitive developmental disorders, people who have trouble responding to heat, socially isolated. But what often gets lost in that is that, heat is a condition that we can address directly through the use of air conditioning. We consider an air conditioner a life-saving device during heat emergencies, and really our entire response is geared towards convincing people to take an action to be in an air-conditioned environment throughout the duration of of the heat emergency. As we look through this slide at the different risk factors, I typically break them down into kind of three big ones. The health factors are closely associated with age, not exclusively. There are people that could be at risk that are not seniors, but largely a lot of these things track to advanced age. The other one is income, and that's the folks that don't own an air conditioner or cannot afford to run it. And then represented there at the bottom, socially isolated. The people that die most often are those folks that live alone, that don't have a social life that gets them out of their houses and into a community environment as often. So when we think about all the actions we're going to take, those are the folks we really want to reach, those people who are advanced aged, low income, and socially isolated. We trigger our plan, and we develop these triggers with our Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to correlate with the times when we see the highest rates of mortality as the temperatures rise. So we're looking at a predicted heat index, and the heat index is not just heat. It's that heat plus humidity measure, or they typically report it in the news as the feels-like temperature. But when they're predicting a heat index of for 2 consecutive days of 95 or higher, or any one day at 100, that's when we're going to turn on our heat plan. We're going to pull our partner agencies on the call, and we're going to start putting our operation into effect. And broadly, this is the way that we break down the actions that we take. We have 3 objectives. We're telling people what to do. We're providing hazardous awareness. We're minimizing public health impacts, and we're minimizing impacts to infrastructure. I'm going to skip most of this stuff and really focus on that cooling center piece, but I want to provide a groundwork and a background about where cooling centers fit into the overall picture, because they really only make sense, especially in relation to our first operational strategy, which is disseminating public information. If we don't tell people what to do during a heat emergency, then they're not going to go to a cooling center, no matter how good a job we do of activating and how much value those programs provide. We really need to tell people to take an action, and the actions we're looking to tell people to take are to either turn on an air conditioner for themselves, to go to another air conditioner environment, whether it be one of our official cooling centers or any other place in the community they might want to go to. You can go to a movie, a mall, whatever. Just get cool is the message from us. And you can go to our cooling centers if you don't have any of those other locations that are available or that are free. And then the third action we ask people to take is to check on their loved ones, to check on their friends and their neighbors, to make sure that they're taking those 2 actions to expose themselves to air conditioning and reduce their exposure. Okay, so with all of that established, what's a cooling center? And we have some basic requirements that we have, and we have 8 partner agencies that fulfill them. We're working with primarily libraries, senior centers, and recreation centers. There's some acronym soup on this slide with the acronyms there in that second bullet, but our library partners are the New York Public Library, the Queens Public Library, and the Brooklyn Public Library. We're a big city, so we've got 3 agencies that actually run our different library systems. DISA, which is represented here by Linda Whitaker, is a Department for the Aging. They run our senior centers. DYCD is Department of Youth and Community Development. They operate youth programs at public housing facilities for low-income youth, and they've got some great rec centers that we use as cooling centers. New York City Housing Authority is our public housing provider in New York City, and they run some senior centers as well as a couple parks facilities, 1 per borough. We have 5 of them. And then the Salvation Army's Temple Corps buildings, where they provide a lot of outreach services to at-risk communities, are the final partner that we have. Together, these 8 partners make up 577 facilities that we had available for this summer, for 2019. It doesn't mean that every time we activate for heat, we have all of those places available. Typically, we have about 500 available at any given time, and the discrepancy between those 2 numbers is that a lot of times we'll have air conditioning problems at these facilities, and they can't be a cooling center if they don't have air conditioning. There could be capital projects that happen on a set schedule, or there might just be a period of time where one program or another is just not available. Department of Youth and Community Development changes their programming operations depending upon whether school is in session, and right after school goes out of session, as they retool their programs, they're down for about a week, and then again for about a week before school starts. So we can get some pretty significant swings in what agencies have facilities open. And from an emergency management perspective, the challenge that we have is accurately communicating to people where they can go. I field requests from the public and from different press agencies all the time to share our list of cooling centers, which we typically don't do, because the big risk is, we send that over to a newspaper, they publish a list of 500 sites, and then the next time we activate, we've got different sites that happen to be open, and we're sending people to places that are not, in fact, cool. So the only place the public can go to actually find out where we have open sites is the Cooling Center Finder on our emergency management website. People can enter in their address. It'll show them the different locations in the area, who operates them. They can call, confirm they're going to be open, and actually show up. So we keep that information pretty close to the vest, and we only publicize that list of active cooling centers when there's actual heat emergency happening. Our core requirements, this is the basic bare bones, what it takes to be a cooling center that we ask our partners to abide by, are that they provide air conditioning. We've gotten very exhaustive feedback from our Department of Health that fans alone will not cut it. They're just blowing hot air at people, especially here in New York, where we've got a well-documented urban heat island effect. Since there's so much concrete and steel in the city, it just absorbs heat all day long, and then it projects that heat back out. So inside temperatures can be even hotter than outside temperatures, and fans are just going to blow that hot air at people. So we require air conditioning. We require our partners to make drinking water available. Doesn't have to be bottled water. Doesn't have to be fancy. We just want to make sure they're getting drinking water available upon request. These are open to the public, free, safe environments. Anybody can come in. We're not asking for ID. While we're operating as cooling centers, anyone can come in. If they're a senior center, obviously 99% of the time they're there just to serve seniors. But when we're operating as a cooling center, we're really making our doors open to anybody and available, and that they have regular, reliable hours. Beyond those core requirements, there's a particular reason that we chose the 8 partners that we do have right now. We're not going to accept just kind of any cool box room to be a cooling center for our typical emergencies. We're really looking for places that are natural community meeting places. They have attractive programming for the communities they serve. So, we talked earlier about the risk factors. Obviously, seniors are high at risk. Linda's going to get into why DIPTA's programming is so well suited to serve them soon. But there's also other variations within a city of 8.5 million people. There's a lot of different languages spoken, a lot of different customs, religions, and at different cooling centers throughout the city, you're going to see a very different mix of clientele that utilize ones in one neighborhood versus another. And we really look at that as a feature of the program because it makes it more relevant and compelling to get people out. We've gotten a lot of good indications and feedback, and it's been borne out by the data that we collect about attendance that people don't want to necessarily go on a hot day to a place that's really just like a meat locker. They want to have some programming there that's attractive to them on their normal days, that really does something that gives them an incentive to talk to, communicate with, interact with people in their communities, and really chip away at that social isolation. We do ask them, our partners, at some times, depending upon exactly how hot it is, to expand their hours and expand their operation times beyond their typical operating hours, depending upon the hazard and what day it falls on. Our biggest challenges are Sundays and holidays, when most of our libraries, most of our senior centers are going to be closing, and we really ask them to scrap and claw and fight to get extra places open on those days. And it requires a little bit of advance notice so that they can do that. We have to make a lot of decisions on a Friday morning about what's going to happen on a Sunday, which is always stressful, but we've got great partners in the city, DIPTA being one of them, that can really pull out all the stops and make that happen. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Linda to talk a little bit about all the things that the Department of Aging does so well.
Good afternoon. The Department for the Aging works with our local organizations to provide services through our senior centers, other different programs such as naturally occurring retirement communities, which are communities where people have grown up or aged or gotten older. They may have started when they were very young, but they never left the neighborhood. So we're calling them naturally occurring retirement communities. Our case management, home care, home delivered meals, mental health, transportation, and much more in every borough. I'm going to kind of go to the next slide and then come back.
Yeah.
Well,
hang on one sec, folks. Here we go.
I just hit the next one.
Uh-oh. I think we might have gotten disconnected.
All I did was touch that.
We might have been like right over an X or something.
Linda, can we help?
Yeah, I think we just get disconnected. If you guys can stretch for time a little bit, we'll be joining in a second. We just lost our connection on the slide.
Okay, all right. You know what? Then, Chris, can you actually answer a quick question? Could you repeat the name of the book that you had mentioned about the Chicago heat wave?
Sure. It's there's a subtitle to it, too, which I forget. I don't have it right in front of me. But it's Heat Wave by Eric Kleinenberg, and that's Kleinenberg spelled Klinenenberg. And I think it's something about a social autopsy of a heat emergency or something like that is the subtitle. And I'm sorry, we've lost our connection with the slides. Obviously, you guys can still hear us. But Linda, maybe you just want to kind of freelance it and,
Sure.
and talk about some of your talking points there.
Sure.
And I can certainly advance the slides. So right now we're on the main slide that's the Department of Aging. Would you like me to advance it?
To the next one, yes.
Okay. So right now we're on the FTA cooling centers.
Right. So during a declared heat emergency, our senior centers become cooling centers, mainly during their normal business hours. But when it's cooling centers declared, they then turn into cooling centers, and anyone can come in and visit to get a respite from the heat. Now, we encourage people who are isolated in their hot house and without air conditioning to come to cooling centers where they can meet the other older adults, They can enjoy all kinds of activities. They have arts and crafts, they have dancing, they do movies, they do parties, they join book clubs, they do all kinds of things. And in this diverse city where we have many different cultures and other languages that Chris alluded to, we have senior centers in every community that address that community there. We have close to 250 senior centers. Not all become cooling centers as for the reasons that Chris talked about. There may be air conditioning problems, there may be scheduled construction work, but we have close to that number who participate as cooling centers. And in the participation of the cooling centers, some of the attractions that people come to is because they know the people. They know the community. The center is known throughout the community, so people can come in and feel more comfortable with knowing that that is there for them. We have languages available for the people who come into those sites, and if there's a language that's not available, they have a language bank which they can call into and have that person speak to the person so that we can understand what it is that they need and that they want. Coming to a cooling center opens the door for so many other things that they may not even be aware of in the community. If they need help with information on their long-term care services and supports for children who may have disabilities or older adults or family members, and even getting help for their friends, there's programs called New York Connects that will help them get what they need. I wanted to mention the people who are frail and unable to come out and are homebound. We have our case management agencies reach out to them during any event, whether it's heat, the winter weather, the hurricane. They call them to make sure that they are okay, or if they're not okay, what is it that they need, and we try to address that need that they may have. Our cooling centers, which are the senior centers, have to have emergency plans or continuity of operation plans. That is one of their requirements of their contract, so that they can be prepared for the heat, the winter, the hurricanes. If their site is unavailable, where else can they go? If their food is vendor is not available, who else do they have? These are some of the issues and questions that they must address in their plans. We also are good at notifying them and keeping them informed. As you mentioned about the libraries, that it was very important to have information given to them. We, at the Department for the Aging, make sure to spread the information that we receive regarding events. We also ask them to join the Notify NYC program, which will give them information directly if they're not getting it from us. But in addition to us, they have it really beforehand a lot of times than what occurs on TV or whatever. They know if a storm is coming, they know 2 days ahead to get ready for the storm, in addition to us alerting them. And you mentioned Hurricane Sandy, and I just wanted to mention about Hurricane Maria and how we were able to assist those who came in from Puerto Rico in them going to our senior centers for food or coming to our information site where we were able to give them information on maybe they needed employment. One of the largest issues had to be with health insurance. The health insurance, many people's health insurance did not transfer from Puerto Rico to New York. So we were able to direct them to our health information and counseling program that assisted the older people with the Medicare and the Medicaid to get the help that they needed as far as health insurance coverage went, because a lot of people came over with medication needs, and we were able to assist them with that, as well as helping those who wanted to continue to work, whether it's part-time or full-time. We were able to direct them to our senior employment program. One of the programs that the Department of Health and the Department of Aging and NISM put together was Be a Buddy, so that we can encourage people to check on each other, especially those who are homebound and isolated. If you know your neighbor is down the hallway from you and she doesn't have visitors, but check on her to make sure, I should say him too, sorry about that, fellas, but check on each other to make sure that everyone's okay and that we can ensure that those who are more isolated or frail are also being served. So I wanted to make sure that you know that we have a lot of services connected, and all it takes is someone to walk into a cooling center, and then they can become familiarized, they can get whatever kind of help that they want. So cooling centers can be fun. So they have the activities, they can get the information, and we're here to help.
Just to echo some of what Linda said, at various times during heat activations in the off-season, I'll find myself visiting some of these places, and you walk into one of these senior centers in Spanish Harlem, and there's a salsa party going on, and you can really see how it's just steeped with the culture and the customs of the people in that specific community, which could just be relevant for a couple blocks in the diameter of that center. And then I'll go down to one in Chinatown, and there's just, vicious mahjong games going on that are highly competitive, and the place will be packed. And it really varies pretty widely across the city about the type of clients that these places are serving. And, all those things that are happening there are really features and benefits of the program because they're enticing people in the doors, and they're kind of the soft carrot that's dangling in front of the other services that really serve that Linda was talking about, case management and the sort of long-term benefit that chip away at the hazards, that chip away at the social isolation, that made these people at risk to heat to begin with, beyond just the air conditioning. And we've really seen that as we look at the attendance of our cooling centers, and we analyze when we operate, we actually call our senior centers traditional service center partners, and anything else that we improvise on the fly to address a shortage on a particular activation. If we're opening up a place that's not traditional, that doesn't have all these other services, and we compare the attendance at the two, it's night and day. People are interested in going to senior centers, going to libraries, going to recreation centers, and utilizing that programming there at a staggeringly greater rate than they are at anything else that I could improvise on a hot day or 2 days before a big heat wave. And it shows up just not in terms of the raw numbers too, but then there's these long-term benefits that accrue over time that make them particularly attractive. And I think that wraps it up for us on the New York City Cooling Center side.
Thanks, Chris and Linda. Really appreciate the content. Their contact information is on the screen right now. I believe Erin is going to type in Michelle's contact information in the chat box. And we have just enough time for a few quick questions.
Shoot.
Michelle, I think I see 2 questions for you. The first question was concerning extended library hours during Sandy. I guess as far as how did the staffing work and how are they paid for that?
Well, libraries are usually open till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night anyway. So whether they were open later than that, I do not know, but they were open as long as they could be. And yes, staff getting paid would have been an issue, and each library is sort of an entity unto itself, so I'm not quite sure. But if they had power, they were open till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. But if they did not have power, libraries are not shelters. People cannot stay there overnight. And a lot of libraries through the state, they didn't have power. And this was a huge problem because it's the end of August, and what's it, dark, 5:30, 6 o'clock then? And people who had nowhere to go had to leave. And I've had many librarians tell me that this was just the worst time of the day, and some of them were so distressed at people begging them to stay that they don't even want to talk about it. I've asked them to come and speak about, sort of the bad side of doing this, and they've refused. So we had to bring in, or they had to bring in, like, police, or security guards to get people out of the library if they had no power and it turned dark, and when it was dark, or 8 or 9 o'clock at night when the library closed.
Were there arrangements made for those with various disabilities, or for those who had limited English proficiency or English as a second language?
So I can only address that in terms of Hurricane Sandy, because, before that, librarians just did what they had to do, and, didn't have sort of like thinking ahead, of what they're going to do for the community. Now, each library is in its own special community, and they know their community. So libraries, have access to all, including people with disabilities. And, if they're in a neighborhood or a community where, English is not spoken as the first language, they really try to have staff that are bilingual. But there's not enough. There's just not enough library staff that can really help with a language issue. We do trainings all the time on how libraries can run language classes, English classes. But yeah, there's absolutely not enough to do, and special arrangements probably were already there. What was already there was there. No special arrangements were made ahead of time that I know of.
Okay. There was a question concerning a toolkit for resources about how libraries can become de facto DRCs. Do you have that? Is that something that you're able to share with our audience?
Debbie, are you talking to me?
I am. I'm sorry.
I was reading. I was just reading something. Repeat that question, please, because I was reading something with my name on it.
You had mentioned earlier about how libraries can kind of be de facto, unofficial DRCs. Is there a toolkit with resources that you could share with our audience?
I can share with you the link to the toolkit that we created for libraries to help prepare in advance. And it really was, it primarily worked with somebody from emergency management. And so it is a toolkit. It's more like checklists. It's like a guidebook and a workbook. And it was really done from the perspective of what emergency management needs from libraries rather than the other way around, because libraries would never think of some of the things that emergency management, thought of or that they need from us. So I can share that link. It is free. It is on our website.
Okay, that would be great. I know that typically this page is left open a little bit longer. If it's not too much trouble, maybe you could just type it right in the chat box after we're done.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to look it up right now.
Okay. And so I have one question. We talk a lot about, libraries forming relationships with emergency managers and being used for different things. But like for somebody a library who's never worked with a municipality in this capacity, or vice versa for a municipality who's never thought of the library as a resource during emergencies, like what would you recommend as far as first steps go?
Well, yeah, so a lot of times the municipality is not thinking that the library can help, and if you have a small library, you may have a director that is, just not forward-thinking in this way. So if you're going into a community, if you're in a community, if you're already integrated into a community and working, to establish a culture of preparedness, just go to the library and ask to speak to the director. Bring the mayor with you, or bring an elected official with you. If you're going to work with the council or whatever, get an elected official. Go to the library, speak to the director. Ask if the trustees can be there, and discuss the kind of things you need if a crisis hits the community.
Great. Well, thank you to all our speakers. I learned something today. I hope everybody else did. I appreciate everything you're all doing to help build a culture of preparedness in FEMA Region 2. With that, we actually have 5 minutes to spare. If nobody has any other questions, I see one more question. Let's see. Are any volunteer programs used to help staff libraries, senior centers, rec centers, etc.? Do you want to answer that, Linda, as far as senior centers go, or Chris, as far as rec centers go?
Yeah, so every once in a while we'll use, as part of our heat plan, typically we rely upon the staff of the host agencies to run it, which in some cases might include some volunteers on the DIFTA side, but for the most part it's their regular staffing pattern that runs it. We're not asking these places to do anything too extraordinary beyond their regular programming, so there's not a huge staffing need that arises where these places are overwhelmed with new visitors. It's typically, small increase here or there and spread across, for us, 500 facilities. So there's not a huge staffing need beyond what's typically done. And that's what really makes it attractive for us in terms of standing these places up. If we were to, try to improvise some city buildings in a new and novel way and provide air conditioning just for the purpose of these heat emergencies, we would have a staffing requirement, which we'd have to meet either through existing city employees that are reassigned or through our volunteer CERT program. And we're lucky that we do have the community emergency response teams available to us to do that when necessary. But our preference is to plug and play with traditional providers that have these national meeting places and services already happening and leverage those resources.
Gotcha. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, I seem to remember last month seeing something about looking for CERT volunteers to help with some of the cooling centers, and I'm glad that you guys keep them busy all year round.
Yeah, what will happen sometimes too is we'll use CERT to help out doing quality assurance checks at cooling centers. As part of managing the program, we do try to keep tabs on them, and since it's such a large network, that can get a little complicated, and sometimes we'll pull CERT in to help out in that way. But that's really for our purposes in auditing the program and making sure we're providing good information to the public as opposed to directly serving the public.
Gotcha. And then, Michelle, do you need to engage additional volunteers?
Well, we open the doors to the volunteers, the CERT teams, or whatever is in our community, and we also encourage that the librarians and the library staff become, certified and, join the CERT team. A lot of the volunteers, they don't have, volunteers that are active after a disaster, they don't have a headquarters in town, so a lot of times they'll come to the library.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for such a robust conversation. You'll notice that their file box has been added with the PowerPoint presentation from Michelle, Chris, and Linda. It's available to download. Also being added to the chat box is the link for the New York State Library website. And from there, disaster preparedness is in the drop-down menu, and the toolkit is located in there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Everyone have a safe and happy Labor Day weekend.
Thanks again for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.